2 glasses of wine, 1 final photo, and then nothing. In 1997, a newlywed couple vanished from a remote treehouse in the Appalachian Mountains during their honeymoon. Their belongings were found neatly arranged, the bed unslept in, their car still parked below, but the couple themselves never seen again. For 26 years, the mystery has grown darker as strange discoveries keep surfacing. A torn piece of clothing, a half-recorded tape, whispered rumors of a hidden trail leading nowhere. Today, we're reopening the case of the disappearing honeymoon, one of the most haunting, unsolved disappearances in modern American history. What happened that night in the treehouse? And why does the forest still seem to be keeping its secrets? If you're drawn to cold cases, haunting mysteries, and long-buried secrets finally resurfacing, don't forget to subscribe. Let's begin. The treehouse stood 30 feet above the forest floor, a wooden hideaway strung between the arms of 2 ancient oaks. Its railing was draped with vines, its windows glowing warm in the last light of dusk. On the deck, a bottle of wine rested between 2 glasses half full, their rims beaded with condensation in the humid Appalachian night. Inside, laughter had echoed earlier. Soft, private laughter of 2 people still new to the word married. A Polaroid camera lay on the table, the last picture taken still face down as it developed. The couple had stepped out to the balcony, arms around each other, gazing down at the darkening woods. Somewhere in the distance, a whip, poor Will called. Later, neighbors would remember hearing music faintly drifting through the trees, then silence. A nearby hunter swore he heard wood creaking and a single startled cry, but no one else reported anything unusual. When the owners returned the next morning with breakfast, the treehouse was quiet. The glasses of wine remained untouched. The camera lay where it had been, its photograph fully developed now, showing 2 smiling faces framed by the balcony railing. The bed had not been slept in. Their shoes, their jackets, their passports, and car keys were neatly placed in the corner. The car sat below, undisturbed, but the couple, James and Claire Whitfield, were gone. No signs of struggle, no footprints leading away, no explanation, only the forest, vast and patient, pressing in on all sides. And so began one of the strangest missing persons cases of the late 20th century. A case that would twist through decades of dead ends, resurface with terrifying discoveries, and leave investigators wondering whether the truth had been hidden not just by time, but by the woods themselves. The knock on the ranger station door came just after 7 on a humid June morning. Ranger David Mason, coffee in hand, thought at first it was a camper lost or reporting a bear sighting, but when he opened the door, he found Martha and Leonard Hayes, owners of the Maple Hollow Treehouse Retreat, standing pale and anxious in the early light. "We can't find them," Martha blurted before David could even greet them. "The honeymooners, James and Claire, they're gone." Ranger Mason set his mug aside. He knew the treehouse she meant. The retreat was a quiet cluster of rustic rentals hidden deep in the Appalachian foothills, marketed to couples wanting solitude. "Gone how?" he asked carefully. "They didn't check out," Leonard explained, his hands trembling as he twisted his cap. "We brought their breakfast basket like we always do. Their car is still there. Their things are inside." But he hesitated. No sign of them. It's like they just vanished. Mason studied them. The Hayeses were practical people, not given to hysteria. He reached for his radio. "Show me," he said. The trail to the treehouse wound upward through oak and hickory. The Hayeses led the way, their voices low, as if afraid of being overheard by the forest itself. Morning mist clung to the branches, softening the edges of the world. The deeper they went, the heavier the silence felt. When they reached the clearing, Mason paused. The treehouse rose above them, rustic but solid, its cedar boards dark with dew. A wooden ladder ascended to the deck. From below, everything appeared normal. A bottle and 2 glasses glimmered on the balcony railing, catching the light. The couple's sedan sat parked nearby, stray with pollen. Mason climbed the ladder first. The wood was damp beneath his palms. On the deck, he found the wine bottle uncorked, the glasses still half full. A moth floated in one of them, its wings spread like paper. The air smelled faintly of oak and something sweeter, maybe the remnants of perfume. Inside, the cabin was tidy. The bed remained neatly made, the quilt untouched. 2 suitcases rested against the wall, clothes folded inside. Passports, a camera on the table, a roll of film still in its foil wrapper, a pair of shoes tucked side by side, as if waiting for their owners to slip them back on. Mason turned slowly, scanning for signs of disturbance. A broken glass overturned chair, a scuff on the wood. Nothing. He stepped onto the balcony again, leaning over the railing. 30 feet below, the forest floor stretched unbroken. No disturbed soil, no footprints, just damp leaves and moss. "Did you touch anything?" he asked the Hayeses. "Only the breakfast basket," Martha said, wringing her hands. "We set it by the door, like always. Then we'll treat this as a missing persons case," Mason said grimly. He reached for his radio, calling the county sheriff's office. By late morning, Sheriff Daniel Harland arrived with 2 deputies. Harland was a tall, square-shouldered man in his 52nds, his face weathered by years of fieldwork. He had seen drownings, lost hikers, even the occasional fugitive hiding in these woods. But this, a couple vanishing from a locked treehouse, was new. "James and Claire Whitfield," he repeated, studying the passports. The photos showed a handsome young man with dark hair and a bright smile, and a woman with wide, curious eyes, 28 and 26, married less than a week. "How long have they been missing?" "Best we can figure," Mason said. "Since last night. The Hayeses saw them around dusk, sitting out on the deck. This morning, gone." The deputies fanned out, photographing the interior. One noted the untouched bed. Another bagged the wine glasses and bottle. Sheriff Harlan crouched beside the suitcases, his fingers brushing the neatly folded clothes. "Doesn't look like they plan to leave in a hurry," he murmured. He stepped onto the balcony, staring into the woods. The trees pressed close, their shadows thick, even in daylight. Somewhere a woodpecker tapped. The sheriff's gaze lingered on the railing, the long drop beyond it. "What if they fell?" he asked quietly. Mason shook his head. "No sign of impact down there. And if they'd fallen, one of them at least would still be here." "This is something else," Harlan grunted, unconvinced. He ordered the area cordoned off and called for search dogs. By afternoon, volunteers from town had gathered at the trailhead. Men with hounds, women in hiking boots, teenagers eager to help. The Whitfields' photographs were circulated. Search grids were assigned as the lines of people moved into the forest. Their voices echoed through the hollows, calling names that dissolved into silence. James, Claire. The dogs strained against their leashes, noses to the ground. But after hours of circling the treehouse and the nearby trails, they found nothing. No scent leading away, no trail to follow. It was as if the couple had vanished into thin air. Back at the cabin, deputies examined every inch. They dusted for prints, finding only the couples and the Hayeses. They lifted the camera from the table. The last photo, still developing when found, showed James and Claire smiling on the balcony, arms around each other. Behind them, the forest blurred into twilight. Their happiness seemed almost too perfect, too staged, like the final frame of a story that ended abruptly. "Someone else had to be here," one deputy muttered. "People don't just disappear." "Then where are the signs?" another countered. "No forced entry, no struggle, no prints." Sheriff Harland pocketed the photo, his jaw tight. He'd seen enough to know this wasn't a simple case. Either the Whitfields had walked into the forest willingly, never to return, or someone had found a way to take them without leaving a trace. That night, as lanterns flickered at the trailhead, Harlan stood with Ranger Mason. The searchers were weary, their voices hoarse from calling. The forest seemed to press closer, swallowing light and sound. "You ever seen anything like this?" Harlan asked. Mason shook his head. "Not in 20 years. People get lost, sure, but a couple together, with no trail number. Maybe they wanted to vanish," Harlan suggested. "New identities start over somewhere, leaving their shoes, their passports, their car." Mason shook his head again. "Doesn't fit." Harlan glanced back at the dark silhouette of the treehouse. Its windows glowed faintly from lanterns inside, but the place looked empty, hollowed out. He couldn't shake the feeling that the forest itself was hiding something, keeping its secrets close. "Tomorrow," he said finally, "we widen the search. Streams, ravines, caves. If they're out here, we'll find them." But deep down he wondered if they were already chasing ghosts. Far above on the treehouse deck, the moth still floated in the wine glass. Its wings beat weakly, then stilled. The forest absorbed the silence once more, patient and unyielding, as if it had seen this before. By sunrise, the trailhead looked less like the start of a honeymoon retreat and more like the staging ground for a crisis. Patrol cars lined the gravel lot. Volunteers huddled with thermoses of coffee. A news van from Asheville had already arrived, its satellite dish angled skyward, reporters pacing with clipboards in hand. Sheriff Harlan stood at the hood of his cruiser, outlining assignments on a topo map. We'll grid north and east today. Focus on ravines and creek beds. Dogs will run first, volunteers sweep behind. If you find anything, clothing, prints, a campsite, flag it and call it in. His deputies listened, faces drawn. Some were young, still green to this kind of case. Others, veterans of decades, wore the weary resignation of men who'd seen searches like this end in heartbreak. Ranger Mason leaned against a post nearby, sipping burnt coffee. He watched the Hayes pacing by the treeing, Martha wringing her hands, Leonard muttering about liability and bookings. They were decent people, but already fear was creeping into their eyes. Fear that their idyllic retreat might forever be marked by tragedy. A camera crew edged closer. The reporter, a young woman with sharp features and a bright scarf, raised her voice. "Sheriff, are you confirming foul play at this stage?" Harlan didn't flinch. "We're treating it as a missing persons case. We have no evidence of foul play. But you do have 2 people who vanished from a locked cabin," she pressed. "No tracks, no signs of departure. That's not typical, is it?" "Nothing about this is typical," Harlan said curtly. He folded the map. "That'll be all for now." The volunteers dispersed, their voices carrying into the woods. Mason watched them go, the sound of names echoing. James, Claire, until it was swallowed by the trees. The search stretched all morning. Teams moved methodically through underbrush, scrambling down gullies slick with moss, probing caves with flashlights. A line of deputies waded through a shallow stream, their boots stirring up silt. Overhead, a helicopter circled, its rotors chopping the humid air. By noon, nothing. No shoe prints in the mud, no torn fabric on branches, no trace of passage. At the command post, the reporter was already broadcasting live. Mason caught snippets as he passed. The newlyweds, James and Claire Whitfield, married just 6 days ago, last seen at the Maple Hollow Treehouse retreat. Locals say this is the strangest disappearance they've ever witnessed. The camera panned to the treehouse rising above the canopy. To Mason, it looked less like a romantic hideaway now and more like a crime scene. Its wooden stilts stark, its balcony eerily empty. Inside the sheriff's office later that afternoon, the couple's families had gathered. James's parents had driven overnight from Kentucky, Claire's from Virginia. They sat across from each other in the cramped room, united in shock. Photographs of their children adorned the bulletin board, graduation portraits, a wedding snapshot, the Polaroid from the balcony. They wouldn't just walk off, James's mother insisted, her voice trembling, not without telling someone. Claire hated the woods, her father added. She was afraid of getting lost. There's no way she'd wander off into the dark. Harlan listened, his jaw tight. He had dealt with panicked families before, but something about this pair, the raw grief in their eyes, the disbelief in their voices, unsettled him. They were clinging to reason, but reason offered no anchor here. "We're doing everything we can," he assured them. "The search is ongoing. We'll find answers." But he couldn't promise more, not when the evidence was this thin. That evening, Mason returned to the treehouse with a deputy. They combed the deck again, kneeling to examine cracks between boards, peering beneath the bed with flashlights. They opened the couple's suitcases carefully, photographing each item. A silk scarf, folded jeans, a guidebook to the Smokies with a page dog-eared for waterfalls. On the nightstand, Mason noticed a cassette tape, a blank Maxell in its case. Next to it, a small handheld recorder. He clicked it on. Static hissed, then silence. The tape inside had been rewound. Curious, Mason pressed play. At first, only faint rustling, then voices, James's warm and teasing. "Say something for the honeymoon log." Claire's laughter, light but nervous. "This is silly. Who listens to tapes anymore? We will 20 years from now. Proof we were happy." More laughter, the sound of clinking glasses, then a low creak like wood under strain. Claire's voice sharper now. "What was that?" A pause. James uncertain. Probably the wind. The tape clicked abruptly. End. Mason stared at the recorder, the hairs rising on his neck. He rewound it, played it again. Same sounds, same sudden stop. He placed the recorder into an evidence bag. "Sheriff needs to hear this," he murmured. That night, Sheriff Harland listened to the tape in his office. The voices filled the room, intimate and haunting, as if the couple were speaking from beyond. When the final creak came, followed by Claire's startled question, he felt the same chill Mason had. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. "Could be nothing," he muttered. "Treehouse settling." "Or someone else on the deck," Mason said quietly. Harland didn't reply. He stared at the Polaroid pinned to the board. James and Claire smiling, arms around each other, the forest behind them already deep in shadow, the tape, the untouched bed, the vanished couple. None of it fit, and outside the town was stirring, rumors spreading. Some whispered about fugitives hiding in the hills. Others mentioned old stories of the forest swallowing people whole. The news broadcast only added fuel, replaying the couple's wedding photo until their faces became symbols of mystery. By morning, strangers would begin arriving, amateur sleuths, reporters, even curiosity seekers. The search for James and Claire Whitfield was no longer just a local matter. It was becoming a spectacle, and the forest, still silent, kept its secrets. By the third day, Maple Hollow no longer felt like a retreat. The gravel parking lot had transformed into a sprawl of satellite trucks, news vans, and curious onlookers. Camp chairs dotted the roadside where locals gathered to watch. Some brought binoculars, others cameras, as though the search for James and Claire Whitfield were a performance staged for their entertainment. Sheriff Harland stood at the edge of it all, jaw tight. The families had begged him to keep the search quiet, but once the first television report aired, silence became impossible. Now, every headline carried the same grim phrase, "The disappearing honeymoon." Claire's younger sister, Emily, sat on the tailgate of a pickup, clutching a photograph. She was 20, still in college, her face drawn from lack of sleep. "This isn't real," she whispered to no one in particular. "They'll just walk out of those woods any minute. They'll laugh at us for worrying." James's father, Robert Whitfield, wasn't as restrained. He cornered a deputy, voice raised. "You think they just vanished? Number, someone did this. You need to be looking for a man, not wasting time in the trees." "We're looking everywhere," the deputy said carefully. "We're following procedure." Robert jabbed a finger toward the forest. "Procedure doesn't bring my son back." Martha Hayes wept quietly beside the ranger station, Leonard's arm around her shoulders. To them, every question from the reporters felt like an accusation. "Why didn't you hear anything? Were you responsible for safety checks?" Their retreat, once their pride, now seemed cursed. Sheriff Harland tried to focus on the practical. He expanded the grid, ordered divers to check nearby ponds, and sent teams into abandoned cabins along the ridges. The dogs worked tirelessly, circling back to the treehouse again and again, noses low, tails uncertain. They caught a whiff, maybe, but each time the trail dissolved at the base of the oaks, as though the forest itself had erased every step. By afternoon, volunteers found something. A mile east, down in a ravine choked with brambles, a bright scrap of fabric caught the eye of a searcher. He waded through nettles to retrieve it. A torn piece of cloth, pale pink, stained with mud. When bagged and carried back, Emily recognized it instantly. "That's Claire's blouse," she whispered, clutching her stomach. "She wore it the night before the wedding. I helped her pack it." The fabric was shown to James's parents. His mother collapsed into tears. The media pounced. Cameras zoomed in on the evidence bag. Narrators speculating wildly about what it meant. Was it proof of foul play, a staged distraction, or simply a scrap caught by the wind? Sheriff Harland refused to comment publicly, but in private he studied the cloth with unease. The edges were jagged, as if ripped suddenly. One side bore a faint reddish smear, not mud, but something darker. It would be sent to the lab, but he already suspected blood. That night, the families gathered in the ranger station, the fabric folded carefully on the table between them. No one spoke for a long time. The word of the ceiling fan filled the silence. Finally, Claire's mother, Elaine, broke down. "My baby? What did they do to my baby?" Robert Whitfield slammed a fist on the table. "You see, this proves it. Someone's out there, maybe a drifter, maybe one of those hunters. But we're wasting time with search parties. We should be questioning everyone in this county. Emily reached across, gripping his wrist. And what if she's still alive, Robert? What if they both are? We can't give up. Sheriff Harland lifted his eyes from the cloth. We're pursuing all avenues, but we don't jump to conclusions. Not yet. Robert leaned back, bitter. Not yet, he repeated while my son rots out there. Across town in a diner where the night shift waitresses poured coffee for blur-eyed deputies. The talk had shifted. Patrons speculated over pie and cigarettes. Some swore they'd seen headlights in the woods late that night. Others whispered of an old hermit who lived deeper in the hills. A few even muttered about the forest taking its own, an Appalachian superstition passed down quietly through generations. Ranger Mason overheard as he ate a sandwich at the counter. He knew these stories, hikers swallowed by the mist, hunters led astray by phantom lights. He'd always dismissed them as folklore, but now, with that torn fabric locked away as evidence, he felt less sure. 2 days later, more searchers combed the ravine where the cloth had been found. It was treacherous ground, steep, slick, and tangled with roots. A deputy slid on the mud, cursing as he caught himself on a sapling. At the bottom, stagnant water pooled, dotted with algae. There, lodged in the muck, they found a shoe, a white sneaker smeared with dirt, its laces knotted tight. It was brought back to the station, cleaned carefully, and placed beside the torn fabric. Claire's father recognized it immediately. She wore those to the rehearsal dinner, said they were the only shoes she could dance in. Another fragment, another piece of a puzzle with no center. The shoe bore no blood, no prints, no obvious sign of struggle. But it meant one thing clear enough. Claire had not walked away in those sneakers. She had been separated from them. The families clung to hope that the items were signs, not endings. But Sheriff Harland felt the weight of a darker conclusion pressing in. 2 people do not vanish without a trace. When traces appear, torn and scattered, they rarely lead to safety. That evening, as the reporters delivered live updates in front of the glowing treehouse, Harland stood once more on its deck. The forest stretched before him, darkening with night. He thought of the tape, the laughter, the creak, the startled voice, and of the objects now lying in evidence bags. The forest was giving pieces, small and cruel, but the whole truth still lay hidden somewhere in the endless shadows. By the end of the first week, exhaustion weighed on everyone. Deputies ran on caffeine and adrenaline. Volunteers drifted away, and the families of James and Claire moved into motel rooms in town, their faces pale under the fluorescent lobby lights. The treehouse itself stood sealed with crime scene tape, its once inviting deck now an eerie reminder of laughter that had gone silent. Sheriff Harland called a press conference on the courthouse steps. Reporters crowded close, microphones raised, cameras rolling. He kept his words measured, steady. We are treating this as an active investigation. Search efforts continue. We are examining all leads. Evidence collected from the vicinity has been sent to the state lab for analysis. One reporter shouted, "Sheriff, do you suspect foul play?" Harland's jaw tightened. "We are considering every possibility." Another asked, "Why were James and Claire Whitfield in a treehouse with no lock on the door? Isn't that a safety failure?" Martha Hayes, standing off to the side, flinched. Leonard pulled her close, shielding her from the camera lenses. Harland raised a hand, silencing the room. "Speculation does not help this case. What helps is information. If anyone in this community saw or heard anything unusual on the night of the 12th of June, I urge you to come forward." The press conference dissolved into a chaos of questions. Harland turned away, his expression grim. He knew the cameras would spin the silence into suspicion, and already the whispers were spreading. Was it an accident, a crime, or something the town itself had overlooked? That evening, deputies began knocking on doors. They canvassed cabins, farms, trailers perched along Ridgeal lines. Some residents were cooperative, others evasive. One hunter claimed he heard a woman scream around midnight, but couldn't say from which direction. A farmer swore he saw headlights in the woods, though his account wavered with every retelling. At the edge of town, deputies questioned a drifter who had been sleeping rough near the highway. His clothes were filthy, his eyes restless. When asked if he'd been near Maple Hollow that night, he shook his head vigorously. "Don't go near those woods after dark. Things live there that don't want you around." He refused to elaborate. Nothing tied him to the couple, but the deputies wrote it down anyway. Back at the station, Harlan studied the interviews. Too many contradictions, too many gaps. He felt less like he was chasing people, and more like chasing smoke. Meanwhile, the lab results returned. The reddish smear on the torn blouse was indeed blood. The human type, A positive. The Whitfields' medical records confirmed Claire's blood type. The news broke quickly, flashing across television screens with bold headlines. Blood-stained clothing linked to missing bride. The families collapsed under the weight of it. Emily wept uncontrollably, clutching her sister's photograph. Robert Whitfield shouted at Harron in the station lobby, his voice cracking. "You wasted days calling this a missing persons case. My son and daughter-in-law were murdered, and you stood there telling us to stay calm." Harlan didn't argue. The evidence spoke for itself. Yet murder without bodies left them stranded, trapped between grief and uncertainty. In the following days, suspicions widened. Deputies returned to the Hayes', asking questions sharper than before. Who had keys to the retreat? Did any employees come by that night? Any maintenance scheduled? Leonard bristled. "You think we'd harm our guests? We've run this retreat for 15 years without a single incident. We're just ruling things out," the deputy said. Martha broke down, wringing her apron. "They were such a sweet couple. James asked me about hiking trails. Claire complimented the quilts. Why would anyone want to hurt them?" The deputies left, but the questions lingered. The Hayes' began receiving anonymous calls at night. Heavy breathing, clicks on the line. Whether cruel pranksters or something darker, they couldn't tell. Sleep fled their house, leaving them hollow-eyed. Across town, rumors grew wilder. Some locals whispered that the couple had staged their disappearance to escape debts. Others muttered about cult activity in the woods, strange lights, symbols carved into trees. A church group claimed the forest itself was cursed, swallowing the sinful. Each theory fanned by gossip, each more outlandish than the last. Emily clung to rationality, begging the sheriff to dig deeper. "You need to look at people who worked here before, groundskeepers, handymen, anyone with a grudge. Someone had to know they were alone up there." Her desperation echoed in every meeting, but Harlan's deputies kept returning with the same emptiness. No suspects, no witnesses, no trail. Then one late afternoon, a deputy named Cole returned from a sweep of the ravine east of the retreat. He placed something on Harlan's desk, a cassette tape, muddied but intact, its label smudged beyond recognition. "Found it wedged between rocks," Cole said. "Couple 100 yards from where we got the blouse. Could have washed down in a storm." Harron picked it up, frowning. Another tape. Another ghost of sound, perhaps. He ordered it cleaned and played on the evidence deck. Static crackled at first, then faint voices. James, unmistakable, breathing heavy, urgent. "Run, Claire." Then a scramble, thudding steps, a crash of wood, Claire's sharp cry, and finally silence cut abruptly, as though the tape had been torn from the recorder. The deputies sat frozen. Harlan pressed stop, then rewind. They listened again. The same desperate fragments. Proof of struggle, proof of terror. It was the first time they had heard fear in the Whitfields' voices, and for the sheriff, it marked the point where this stopped being a missing persons case. It was now officially a homicide investigation. That night, the forest loomed larger than ever. The retreat, once a place for love and laughter, now felt like a stage where something violent had played out, something still hidden in the shadows. Harlan stood once more on the balcony of the treehouse, holding the bag tape in his hand. Below him, the woods whispered with wind and insects. He tried to imagine the couple's last moments here, the wine, the laughter, the sudden intrusion of terror. The trees gave no answer, only silence. But Harlan knew this. Someone, somewhere had seen. Someone had kept a secret for too long, and sooner or later that secret would crack open. The headline hit the Asheville Gazette first, then spread to national outlets within hours. Blood and tape, missing honeymooners case, now a homicide investigation. By the second week, Maple Hollow was overrun. True crime bloggers arrived with cameras, live streaming their walks around the retreat. Podcasters recorded episodes in motel rooms, speculating wildly. Television anchors stood on the courthouse lawn, their voices solemn as they described the treehouse of terror. Sheriff Harlan watched the circus from his office window with growing disgust. Every lens pointed outward was a distraction from the work inside. Yet he knew public pressure could turn into political pressure, and political pressure could kill an investigation before it began. He closed the blinds, shutting out the noise, and turned back to his desk. Spread across it were files, photographs, and transcripts of interviews, and in the center lay the cassette tape recovered from the ravine. Run, Claire. The words still echoed in his mind. Theories multiplied in the absence of answers. Some were absurd. Alien abduction, Appalachian folklore, whispers of phantom hitchhikers. Others were cruel practical. James had killed Claire and fled. Claire had killed James. They had both been victims of a local predator. The Whitfield's families fractured under the weight of suspicion. Robert Whitfield railed against the suggestion his son was capable of violence. James was a dentist for God's sake. He loved Claire. He wouldn't hurt her. Elaine Parker, Claire's mother, wept openly at the implication. My daughter was the gentlest soul. She never raised her voice. Never. Don't you dare blame her. Reporters seized on every emotional outburst. Clips aired nightly. Grieving parents, distraught siblings, angry accusations. The story had become theater, and the world was watching. Meanwhile, deputies dug deeper into the town's history, and soon a name resurfaced. Earl Grady, 56 years old, lifelong resident, lived in a decaying farmhouse on the outskirts of the forest. Arrest record spanning decades. Trespassing, public intoxication, one charge of assault in his 20 seconds, known to carry a hunting rifle, known to watch hikers through binoculars. More troubling, 2 years earlier, he'd been questioned in the disappearance of a teenage girl who had last been seen hitchhiking near Maple Hollow. No charges had stuck. The girl was never found, but the suspicion lingered. When deputies interviewed locals, his name came up again and again. That Grady fell, he's not right. Always snooping around the woods, keeps to himself, but watches everybody else. Harlan ordered him brought in. The interrogation room smelled of stale coffee and cigarette smoke. Earl Grady sat slouched in a chair, his beard unkempt, his fingernails black with dirt. He smirked at the deputies as though amused by the spectacle. "You think I took your pretty couple?" he drawled. "What would I want with honeymooners? Where were you the night of the 12th of June?" Deputy Cole asked. Earl scratched his neck. "Home. Anyone who can confirm that?" "Nope." His grin widened. "I live alone. My alibi is me." They pressed him hour after hour. His story didn't change. He admitted to walking the woods often, but denied going near the treehouse. He denied knowing James or Claire. When shown the Polaroid photo of the couple on the balcony, he shrugged. Happy kids. Shame. What happened? His effect unsettled the deputies. Too calm, too rehearsed. Yet, without evidence, no fingerprints, no belongings found at his home. They couldn't hold him. After 24 hours, they released him. Outside, reporters swarmed, shouting his name, snapping photographs. Earl grinned like a man enjoying the attention. "You'll never prove nothing," he told the cameras before climbing into his truck. That grin haunted Harlan long after. Ranger Mason, however, wasn't convinced. He'd known men like Earl, loners hardened by years of suspicion, guilty of many things, but not always the thing at hand. Mason returned to the woods, preferring trees over theories. At dusk, he walked the ravine where the tape had been found. The air was damp, the smell of moss sharp. He crouched near the rocks, studying the flow of water, imagining how long the cassette might have rested there. Something else caught his eye, a shape half buried under wet leaves a few yards upstream. He brushed the debris away and found a plastic comb snapped in half. He bagged it carefully. Back at the station, Emily confirmed it. That was Claire's. She carried it in her purse. Always another fragment, another proof of presence, but still no bodies. The case consumed the town. Businesses sold justice for James and Claire ribbons. Churches held vigils. Tourists drove hours just to take photographs of the taped-off treehouse. One evening, Mason stopped by the diner. Locals were huddled in booths, whispering. He caught his name spoken, then silence when he entered. He knew what they were saying. The ranger knows more than he's saying. Maybe he's covering something up. It was the curse of these cases. In the absence of answers, suspicion turned inward, feeding on whoever stood closest to the shadows. Sheriff Harlan sat late at his desk, staring at the tape recorder. He played the ravine cassette again, listening to the desperate voices. the sudden silence. Then he pressed stop, closed his eyes, and tried to imagine the scene. James shouting, Claire running, something crashing through wood. What had they seen? He opened his eyes, scanning the evidence board. Photographs of the blouse, the sneaker, the comb, each one a breadcrumb, each one leading deeper into the woods. He lit a cigarette, smoke curling toward the ceiling. He knew this much. The Whitfields hadn't vanished by choice. And if Earl Grady wasn't their predator, someone else in these hills was. Someone who was still out there. Rain fell hard that night, beating the tin roof of the ranger station and turning the trails into mud-slick channels. By dawn, the creek that cut through Maple Hollow had swollen, carrying branches, cans, and scraps of forest detritus downstream. Searchers pulled on ponchos, their boots sucking into the ground with every step. For Harron, the storm was both curse and chance. It erased tracks, but unearthed things long hidden. He ordered teams to sweep the waterline, checking snags where debris might have caught. By mid-morning they found something, a leather wallet wedged against a root where the current bent. It was waterlogged, the stitching frayed, but inside the plastic window, a photo remained intact. James Whitfield smiling stiffly in his driver's license portrait. The wallet contained his cards, his ID, $73 in cash. No signs it had been stolen. It looked dropped, not discarded. When Robert Whitfield was shown the wallet, he turned pale. James never went anywhere without it. He'd joke he needed his license just to brush his teeth. He pressed the leather to his chest. This proves it. Something happened. Someone took them. The families clung to the wallet as if it were proof of a life. But to Harron, it was the opposite. A man didn't leave his money behind unless he no longer had a choice. That evening, deputies questioned the families again, pressing harder this time. Had James or Claire mentioned anyone who might wish them harm? No, Robert snapped. They were newlyweds. They had no enemies. What about debts, disagreements, secrets? Elaine flinched at the word. Don't you dare suggest my daughter had secrets. She told me everything. But Harlan noticed Emily looking down, twisting her hands in her lap. Emily, he prompted. She hesitated, then said softly, Claire wasn't comfortable in the woods. She told me she didn't want to go. James insisted, said it would be romantic. She packed a bag of books in case she got bored. It was the first contradiction. Earlier, Elaine had sworn Claire was excited, enchanted by the idea of seclusion. Now, Emily painted a different picture, one of reluctance, of compromise. Harlan made note of it. He'd seen families fracture under pressure before, their stories splintering as grief cut into memory. Still, contradictions mattered. They opened doors. Meanwhile, suspicion toward Earl Grady had cooled. Deputies trailed him for days, but he did nothing more suspicious than drink cheap whiskey on his porch and shout at passing reporters. The case needed fresh direction that came from an unlikely place. A retired logger named Curtis Blackwell stopped by the station with a story. His hands shook as he lit a cigarette, his face weathered from years in the Sunday. I was hunting the night they went missing, he said, down by Old Quarry Road. Around midnight, I heard shouting, a man yelling, a woman crying. Thought maybe it was drunks, but then I heard a gunshot. Just one echoed through the holler. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Harlan asked. Curtis exhaled smoke. Didn't want to get involved, but now, seeing it on television every night, I can't keep quiet. He marked the location on a map, a ridge 2 miles from the retreat. Harlan dispatched a team the next morning. They climbed the muddy slope, rain dripping from pine needles until they reached a clearing of shale and twisted trees. The ground was scattered with beer cans and rusted tools, signs of trespassers. Then one deputy called out, "Sheriff!" Against a rock half hidden by moss lay a shell casing, brass, dulled with age. Harlan bagged it, holding it up to the gray light, the first hard evidence of a weapon. That evening, news of the casing leaked. Reporters framed it as proof of murder, headlines blaring. Gunshot heard on night of disappearance. Evidence recovered. The families collapsed again under the weight. Elaine Parker fainted in her motel room. Robert raged at the sheriff in the station lobby, his voice echoing off the walls. You keep finding scraps, not answers. Where's my son? Where's his wife? Harlan listened in silence, letting the storm pass. When Robert finally broke down, slumping into a chair, Harlan spoke quietly. We're closer. Whoever fired that shot didn't cover their tracks well enough. We'll find more. But inside, doubt nodded at him. He had fragments. A blouse, a sneaker, a comb, a wallet, a shell casing, pieces of a puzzle with no center. Every discovery raised more questions, and time was bleeding away. That night, Mason walked the retreat grounds alone. Moonlight silvered the wet leaves, the treehouse looming like a ghost above him. He paused at the base of the stairs, looking up at the taped-off balcony. He thought of James's voice on the tape. "Run, Claire." He thought of the wallet carried downstream. He thought of the casing glinting by the quarry. The forest was giving them breadcrumbs, but breadcrumbs, he knew, weren't just trails. They were also bait. Something had happened here, something violent, deliberate, and someone, somewhere in these hills, still knew exactly how the Whitfields' honeymoon had ended. The quarry sat like an open wound in the forest, a vast pit carved by decades of stone cutting and left abandoned when the company pulled out in the late 72nds. Locals avoided it. Children whispered about ghosts in the stagnant water. Hunters swore animals steered clear of its cliffs. Now, for the first time in years, lawmen combed its edges with flashlights and marking flags. Sheriff Harlan stood on the ridge, the recovered shell casing in his pocket. Below him, the pit filled with shadows, its surface rippling faintly under the morning breeze. He felt the same unease he'd known as a boy when dared to climb the quarry fence, as if the place itself wanted to swallow intruders whole. Deputies spread out in lines, scanning the ground. Within an hour, one of them called out sharply. They gathered around a shallow depression near the treeine. The rain had eroded the soil, exposing something pale against the dark earth. At first, it looked like a stick. Then Harlan crouched, brushing mud aside with his gloved hand. A bone, not animal, human. The search halted, the air thick with dread. Forensics were called in from Asheville, their van crunching up the gravel road by afternoon. They cordoned off the site, digging carefully with brushes and trowels. By dusk, fragments of a skeleton emerged. Ribs, vertebrae, the curve of a skull. It wasn't James or Claire. The bone wear, the state of decomposition, told them it was older, perhaps decades old, but it was human, and it was here. The discovery detonated through town like a thunderclap. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, demanding answers. Is this connected to the Whitfields? Are we dealing with a serial killer's dumping ground? Harlan refused comment, but behind closed doors, he admitted what everyone was thinking. The quarry might not just hold one set of secrets. Emily Parker reacted with horror. If that's not clear, then who is it? How many others have vanished here? Robert Whitfield seized on the find as proof of his own suspicions. This was no accident. That quarry's been used before. Someone around here's been getting away with murder for a long time. As the skeleton was shipped to the state lab, deputies pressed harder into old case files, disappearances once dismissed as runaways. Hitchhikers never seen again. Drifters lost to the woods. A pattern began to shimmer faintly, isolated, spread across years, but always within reach of Maple Hollow. One deputy pinned photographs of the missing on the evidence board. Faces stared back, blurred by age. A teenage girl, a middle-aged hiker, a young man last seen at a gas station. Emily stared at the board, her voice shaking. What if, Claire, what if she isn't the first woman they took into those woods? What if she's just the latest? No one contradicted her. Meanwhile, Harlan noticed something else. Fractures in the family's own accounts. During a second interview, Robert Whitfield admitted James had argued with Claire the week before the wedding. She didn't want to come up here, said she hated bugs, hated being cut off. James told her she was ungrateful. It mirrored what Emily had said earlier, but Robert's tone was harsher, less forgiving. Elaine Parker grew defensive when asked again about Claire's habits. She loved hiking, she insisted. We went on trails when she was little. Yet Emily had been adamant Claire despised the outdoors. Harlan filed it all away. Contradictions didn't prove guilt, but they showed pressure points, and sometimes the cracks in a story revealed more than the story itself. 2 nights later, the forensic lab called back. The bones from the quarry belonged to a female, estimated age between 16 and 20. Time of death at least 15 years ago. No ID, no clothing remnants, nothing but a skeleton weathered by years underground. But the case file Harlan had been reviewing leapt to mind. In 1982, a 17-year-old named Linda Holloway had vanished while hitchhiking along Highway 19, last seen climbing into a pickup truck. Her body was never found until now. The confirmation rattled the town. Linda's parents, now elderly, broke down in tears at the news. The Gazette printed her school photograph beside Claire's bridal portrait, two young women frozen in time, linked by the same forest. The quarry had given up one ghost. The question was whether it held more. On the third sweep, divers entered the water, murky, cold, clouded with silt. They found nothing but rusted tools, tires, and the skeleton of a deer. But divers admitted visibility was poor. Whole bodies could rest there unseen. That night, Mason drove past the quarry alone. He parked by the fence, headlights off, listening to the frogs and cicadas. His gut twisted. He'd patrolled these woods for years, hiked these trails, thought he knew every bend. Yet it seemed the land itself had been hiding something from him, something monstrous. He thought of the Whitfields' laughter, caught on tape, cut short by fear. He thought of Linda Holloway, buried in shallow dirt, and he wondered how many others had vanished beneath these same trees, their stories untold, their names forgotten. The silence offered no answer, only the endless, patient, dark. The quarry discovery changed everything. What had started as a honeymoon tragedy was now tangled with a decades-old killing ground. Reporters flocked to the pit, broadcasting live from its rust-cold cliffs, calling it the graveyard in the pines. Every night, the families watched the coverage from their motel rooms, each new headline cut like glass. Elaine Parker sobbed openly while Robert Whitfield grew darker, quieter, rage simmering behind his eyes. Emily paced constantly, chain smoking, unable to sit still. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was fear. Fear that James and Claire had joined a lineage of victims stretching back further than anyone wanted to imagine. Sheriff Harland doubled the investigative team. He pulled in old files, contacted retired deputies, and ordered every unsolved disappearance within 50 miles re-examined. The board in the station filled quickly. In addition to Linda Holloway in '82, there was Mark Jessup, 24, last seen in 1987, leaving a bar on Route 14. A hiker, Alice Corwin, gone without a trace in 1991. And a boy, only 15, who'd vanished in '94 after taking his dirt bike into the hills. All had disappeared within a rough circle around Maple Hollow. The pattern chilled Harron. For years, the cases had been scattered, each treated as isolated. Now, under the shadow of the quarry, they seemed to orbit the same dark center. Forensics dug deeper into the Whitfield's items. The wallet showed no fingerprints other than James's. The comb carried faint traces of hair consistent with Claire's. The blouse bore not just her blood, but also a faint smear of oil. Machine oil. It wasn't definitive, but it hinted at contact with tools, perhaps in a workshop or garage. Deputies began canvassing auto shops, machine sheds, even barns with equipment. Suspicion circled back inevitably to Earl Grady. He had a rusting garage full of tools and engines, most coated with oil, but searches turned up nothing linking him to the Whitfields. No fabric fibers, no personal belongings, no blood. Frustration nodded at Harlan. It was as if the clues were designed to point and then vanish, leaving him grasping at air. Inside the motel, paranoia grew like mold. One evening, Emily accused Robert of knowing more than he admitted. "You said James never argued with Claire, but that wasn't true. You lied to protect him." Robert snapped back, his voice sharp. "What are you suggesting? That my son killed his own wife? That's insane." Elaine intervened, trembling. "Stop it, both of you. We're tearing ourselves apart." But suspicion had already taken root. Emily began to wonder whether James had led Claire into the woods against her will, whether the man who'd smiled in their family photographs was someone she hadn't truly known. Robert, in turn, eyed the Parkers with growing distrust. He muttered that Claire had been unstable, that perhaps she had harmed James. The families no longer dined together. They sat in separate corners of the diner, avoiding eye contact. Grief had become war. Late one night, Mason drove out to the Parker motel. Emily met him outside, shivering despite the summer heat. "I can't sleep," she admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I hear her voice on that tape. I see her running, and I wonder, was she running from him or from someone else?" Mason hesitated. He had no answer, but he did know the forest. knew how easily it swallowed secrets. He told her quietly, "Don't let suspicion eat you. It'll hollow you out. Keep your eyes on the truth, not the shadows." But even as he said it, Mason wondered if he was lying to himself. The shadows had their own gravity. The quarry gave up another secret. The following week, divers returning with stronger lights located something wedged beneath a ledge. It took 2 hours to free it, a rusted metal box sealed tight. When opened on shore, it contained waterlogged papers, fragments of photographs, and a knife. The blade was stained with what might have been blood long ago, though time and water had scoured it. One photograph, though ruined, showed the faint outline of a young woman's face. Forensic reconstruction later suggested it might have been Linda Holloway. The find suggested something more chilling than coincidence. Someone had used the quarry not just as a grave, but as a vault, a place to discard trophies, to bury proof. Harlan stood at the quarry's edge that evening, looking down at the black water. The sunset painted the cliffs red as though blood itself stained the stone. He thought of the Whitfields last night. Wine glasses untouched, bed unslept in. He thought of Linda Holloway, 17 forever. He thought of the knife, rusted but still sharp enough in memory to cut. Whoever had haunted these woods wasn't finished. Their hands had reached across decades. And now James and Claire were part of the same story. The sheriff lit a cigarette, the smoke drifting into the twilight. The forest had secrets, but so did people, and it was time to find out which was darker. By late July, the town of Maple Hollow lived in a state of siege. Patrol cars prowled the back roads, deputies searched barns and sheds, and helicopters beat across the sky. Yet for all the activity, the heart of the mystery remained untouched. James and Claire were still gone. The quarry had given bones, a knife, fragments of a forgotten life, but no trace of the honeymooners. Harlan began spending his nights in the station, poring over cold case files by the dim glow of a desk lamp. The paper smelled of dust and neglect, but within the brittle folders he found a pattern emerging, sharper each night. All the vanished had one thing in common. They had been travelers, outsiders, people on the road. Linda Holloway hitchhiking, Mark Jessup Barr hopping through towns not his own, Alice Corwin hiking alone on a vacation, and now James and Claire, honeymooners from out of state. The forest, it seemed, had a hunger for strangers. Then one humid morning, the sheriff's office received a panicked call. A local girl, one 7-year-old Madison Boyd, had failed to return home after babysitting. Her car was found abandoned near Route 19, the driver's door open, headlights still burning into the dawn. The families of the Whitfields and Parkers heard the news from the motel television. Elaine Parker gasped and turned away from the screen, tears welling. Emily whispered, "It's happening again." Reporters seized on it immediately. Another girl missing near Maple Hollow. The search began within an hour. Deputies scoured ditches, fields, and culverts. Harlan himself walked the roadside, jaw clenched, his pulse hammering. It was too much. One disappearance could be explained. 2 might be coincidence, but 3 spanning decades and converging here could not be chance. That evening, Harlan convened a meeting in the courthouse basement. Present were deputies, forensics, Ranger Mason, and a profiler flown in from Raleigh. The profiler, a pale woman named Dr. Evelyn Shaw, spread photographs across the table. "Look at the spacing," she said. "Every victim vanishes within a radius of 5 miles. That's not random, that's comfort zone. Whoever is doing this lives here, hunts here, disposes of bodies here. They know these woods intimately." She tapped a finger on Linda Holloway's photograph. Victim 1, hitchhiker, then Jessup, the hiker, the boy, years between, but the same radius. Now James and Claire, now Madison. Mason frowned. "But Earl Grady's been here all those years. Fits your profile." Dr. Shaw shook her head. "He's too visible. Predators like this don't flaunt. They hide, blend, they appear ordinary, trusted." Her gaze swept the room, unsettling in its weight. "Look close to the families. Look close to the community leaders. That's where these people burrow." The silence that followed was heavy. Meanwhile, deputies expanded the search for Madison Boyd. At dawn on the 3rd day, they found her shoe, a red Converse sneaker lying on a trail a mile from the quarry. The tread matched the second set of prints found weeks earlier near the Whitfields' blouse. 2 vanishings, 2 trails, 1 hunter. The town turned inward with suspicion. Neighbors eyed one another across fences. Parents forbade their children from walking alone. Churches filled with whispered prayers, but also whispered accusations. Some pointed again to Earl Grady. Others muttered about Leonard Hayes, who owned the retreat. Even Ranger Mason wasn't spared. A podcaster accused him of leading searchers away from evidence, of secretly knowing where the bodies were. Mason tried to ignore it, but when he found a note nailed to his cabin door reading, "The woods belong to you," his stomach nodded. In the motel, paranoia reached a breaking point. Robert Whitfield confronted Emily in the parking lot. "You told them James forced Claire to come here. That makes him sound like a monster. Why would you poison the investigation against my boy?" Emily snapped back, trembling. "Because it's the truth. She didn't want to be here. Maybe if she hadn't come, she'd still be alive." Elaine tried to intervene, but Robert's voice rose. "So, you blame him, my son? While some bastard out there is hunting girls like animals." Harlan arrived, just as the argument reached a fever pitch. He pulled them apart, his own patience frayed. If you tear each other to pieces, the real predator walks free. But even he felt the tremor of doubt because Dr. Shaw's words Two days later, deputies combing the quarry ridge found a new clue. A torn scrap of cloth snagged on barbed wire. When tested, the fiber matched the missing girl's shirt. Madison Boyd had passed this way, and if she had, then James and Claire had, too. The quarry wasn't just a grave, it was a crossroads. Harlan stared at the board that night, the faces of the lost staring back at him. His cigarette burned to ash in his fingers. Whoever was hunting here had patience measured in decades, and now the sheriff realized with cold certainty that Hunter was still active, still watching, still feeding. The quarry loomed larger each day, as if the entire investigation were being pulled into its depths. Every lead bent back toward it, every clue seemed to have passed near its jagged cliffs. Deputies joked grimly that they should just drain the whole damn thing, though everyone knew the quarry ran deep, deeper than pumps could reach. By the first week of August, the search teams had combed the surrounding forest for miles, marking finds on maps, bagging scraps of cloth, bits of rusted metal, cigarette butts that might have lain there for decades. Yet the question remained, where were James and Claire? The answer came unexpectedly on a blistering afternoon when the divers went down again. Visibility was poor, a brown haze of silt and algae. The divers moved slowly, beams cutting through darkness. At 20 feet, one spotted something odd, a flash of red beneath a mat of weeds. He pulled gently. The weeds floated free, revealing curved metal, the outline of a car. The discovery sent a shockwave through the command post. Deputies crowded the monitors as an underwater camera descended. The car rested at an angle half buried in silt. The shape of its frame, though corroded, was unmistakable. A sedan from the late 7 seconds. When hauled to the surface by crane, the dripping shell groaned, water cascading from shattered windows. The vehicle's paint, once crimson, had dulled to a murky rust. Inside, beneath muck and lakeweeds, lay bones. 2 sets. The state lab would confirm identities, but no one doubted. The Whitfields had been found. Elaine collapsed when told. "Not my baby, not my Claire." Emily wrapped her arms around her mother, though her own sobs broke through. Robert Whitfield received the news in silence, his face hard as if carved from stone. He turned away from the deputies and stood alone in the hallway, trembling. "They didn't deserve this," he whispered, his voice. "They were supposed to build a life." The motel, once filled with hope of their return, became a morgue of grief. Reporters recorded every tear, every shout, every slammed door. The case had shifted, no longer missing persons, now officially homicide. Forensics went to work. The bodies were too decomposed for cause of death, but fractures suggested violence before drowning. The car doors had been locked from the outside, and in the glove compartment, preserved by metal, investigators found something astonishing. A cassette tape. It wasn't the same as the one pulled from the ravine. This one was labeled in smudged pen, Side B. When played, the tape hissed, then gave way to muffled voices. James's tone urgent. "Claire, stay down, don't open the door." A thud, glass shattering, Claire screaming, then a man's voice. Deeper, unfamiliar. "Get out of the car." The tape ended abruptly. The revelation shook the town. Now it wasn't just conjecture. Someone had forced the Whitfields from their car before it was sent into the quarry. Someone else had been there, commanding, violent. Dr. Evelyn Shaw, the profiler, listened 3 times. Her verdict was grim. That's not random violence. That's control. Whoever this was had experience. He knew how to trap, how to threaten. That voice belonged to someone accustomed to dominance. Her eyes narrowed. And someone the Whitfields likely knew enough to stop for. Theories exploded. Earl Grady again topped lists. Leonard Hayes, the retreat owner, was whispered about. Even Robert Whitfield wasn't spared by the rumor mill. Had he followed them, jealous of his son's marriage? But Harlan kept circling back to the oil stain on Claire's blouse. It hadn't come from the quarry. It hadn't come from the car. It suggested handling, work, machinery. He ordered deputies to quietly begin checking every workshop in town. Meanwhile, Madison Boyd's fate hung in the balance. The missing teenager's shoe had been found, but no body. To the sheriff, the urgency doubled. "If we don't find her alive," he told Mason one night, "we're not just chasing ghosts anymore. We'll be tallying a body count that started before we were born." Mason nodded grimly. The ranger had been quiet since the Whitfield's car surfaced. "The forest doesn't give up secrets easy," he said, "but when it does, it gives them all at once." He paused, staring out at the dark ridges. This isn't one man's crime of passion. This is a ritual, a cycle, and it's not done yet. At midnight, back at the motel, Emily couldn't sleep. She lay awake, headphones on, listening again to the recovered tape. The voice, that deep, commanding voice, drilled into her. She couldn't place it, but something about it, the cadence, the draw. She sat up sharply, her breath catching. She had heard it before, not from a stranger, from someone they had met after the disappearance. Emily didn't tell her mother right away. She sat in the motel bathroom with the door locked, headphones pressed tight, replaying the tape until the hiss filled her ears. Each time, the voice struck her deeper, pulling memories she'd tried to ignore. "Get out of the car." The tone was steady, firm, almost casual. Not the panic of a stranger, not the wildness of someone improvising. It was a voice of command, and she had heard it in the sheriff's station, clear as day. Detective Leonard Hayes. By morning, she couldn't contain it. She cornered Mason outside, gripping his sleeve with trembling hands. "It's him," she whispered. "The man on the tape. Leonard Hayes." Mason blinked, taken aback. "Hayes, the retreat owner." Emily nodded violently. "I swear to God I'd know that voice anywhere. It's the same draw, the same rhythm." He told them to get out of the car. Mason hesitated. Leonard Hayes was respected, middle-aged, calm. He'd offered the retreat free of charge for the investigation. He was in half the newspaper photos shaking hands with the sheriff. To accuse him was unthinkable. Yet Mason had learned long ago, monsters rarely looked monstrous. "Don't tell anyone else," he said quietly. "Not yet. Let me bring it to Harlan." When Sheriff Harlan heard, he didn't dismiss it. Instead, he rubbed his temples, staring at the tape machine on his desk. "I've known Leonard 20 years, he said. "He's donated to the town fair, helped build the school gym. He's the last man His voice trailed, but Emily's conviction haunted him. Her face was pale, her hands shaking as she insisted. "It's him. I'm not wrong." Harran ordered the tape sent for voice analysis at the state lab. In the meantime, he quietly had deputies pull Leonard Hayes' records, property deeds, financial history, business dealings. The results were unsettling. The retreat, once bustling, had bled money for years. Hayes was deep in debt, yet he owned 3 parcels of woodland around the quarry, all bought at suspiciously low prices from families who'd moved away after bad luck. On one deed dated 1983, the seller's daughter had gone missing that very year, Linda Holloway. The revelations bled into the press despite Harlan's attempts to seal them. By the next evening, the Gazette ran a headline, "Quarry owner under scrutiny." Leonard Hayes held a press conference on the courthouse steps. He stood tall, flanked by his lawyer, smiling grimly. "These accusations are baseless," he said. I have devoted my life to this community. I would never harm a soul." His voice rolled out over the crowd, steady, confident, a drawl like honey poured over gravel. Emily froze in the back, her stomach dropping. It was the same voice, the same exact timbre. Elaine clutched her daughter's arm. "Emily, are you sure?" Emily whispered. "Mom, I'd bet my life." That night, deputies searched Hayes's retreat under a sealed warrant. They found tools stained with old oil, ropes, a woman's bracelet wedged behind a workbench. When shown the bracelet, Elaine gasped. "That's Claire's. She wore it every day." Hayes was brought in for questioning, his expression calm, almost bored. "Sheriff," he said evenly, "I think you've lost your way. A business owner finds himself framed because you're desperate for answers. You won't find what you're looking for in me." But when Harlan pressed about the bracelet, Hayes smiled faintly. People leave things behind, especially when they're running. Mason, watching through the glass, felt a cold chill. The calmness wasn't denial. It was something worse. Pride, as though Hayes believed himself untouchable. Meanwhile, Madison Boyd was still missing. Search teams fanned out from the quarry, calling her name, finding nothing. Parents wept on the courthouse steps, begging for her safe return. And Emily, lying awake that night, couldn't shake the sound of Hayes's voice on the tape. "Get out of the car." She wondered what Claire had thought in that final moment. If she'd looked to James for protection, or if she'd already known it was futile. Emily whispered into the dark. "I'm going to finish this for you, Claire. I promise." But the next morning news arrived that shattered the fragile hold on order. A hunter trekking near the quarry ridge stumbled across a shallow grave. Deputies uncovered it carefully, brushing away pine needles, soil, and roots. Inside lay the body of Madison Boyd. Her throat bore marks of rope. Her hands were bound. Her eyes stared blindly at the sky. Another life taken, another secret buried in the quarry's shadow. And now there was no denying it. The killer was still here, still active, still watching. The town of Maple Hollow had not slept since the discovery of Madison Boyd's grave. Vigil candles burned on church steps, news vans ringed the courthouse. The air carried a charge of fear and fury. The sense that the predator long whispered about had finally been cornered. Sheriff Harland called in every available deputy. The retreat was sealed, its cabins searched top to bottom, evidence bags piled high, rope, oil-stained rags, fragments of jewelry, even a child's blue hair ribbon caked in dust. Each piece deepened the horror. Each raised the same question. How many victims lay hidden beneath the forest floor? Leonard Hayes remained calm. In the interrogation room, he sat with folded hands, answering questions with the poise of a man who had prepared his lines for years. "You're grasping at ghosts," he said smoothly. "Stray objects, rumors, fears. You'll never find what you want because it isn't there." Harlan studied him through the glass. Hayes's composure was uncanny, no flicker of nerves, no sweat on his brow. Yet behind his eyes, the sheriff saw something else. Calculation. The state lab had rushed the tape comparison. Their report landed that evening. High probability that the voice commanding Claire to get out of the car belonged to Leonard Hayes. Not conclusive, but damning. Harlan stepped into the room, tape recorder in hand. He pressed play. "Get out of the car." The words filled the air, metallic and cruel. Hayes's lips twitched faintly. He leaned back in his chair. "So what if it's me? Proving I spoke words doesn't prove a crime. Maybe I told them to get out because I was helping. Maybe you're twisting what little you've got." Emily, watching from the observation room, slammed her fist against the glass. "Helping? You murdered them." Her cry echoed in the narrow hallway. The standoff stretched for days. Hayes refused to confess, his lawyer stonewalling. Deputies dug deeper into his past. Slowly, the picture sharpened. In 1982, the year Linda Holloway vanished, Hayes had been a truck driver. His rots ran straight past the hitchhiker's last sighting. In 1987, when Mark Jessup disappeared, Hayes was renovating cabins, one of which stood on land later linked to quarry dumping. In 1991, when Alice Corwin vanished, he'd taken hunting trips into the same woods. And in 1994, when the boy went missing, Hayes was teaching his own nephew to fish near the quarry. Always present, always nearby, always ordinary. Then a break came from an unexpected quarter. Micah Carraway, Earl Grady's quiet farmhand, once dismissed as background noise, requested to speak from his hospital bed, still recovering from an accident months prior. Micah whispered, truths long buried. I seen him, he said harassingly. Leonard Hayes, seen him lead folks off the road before. Always thought it weren't my business, but when Madison went missing, I knew. Micah described nights at the retreat when Hayes disappeared into the forest, returning with scratches and dirt on his boots. He recalled hearing cries carried on the wind. Then silence. He bowed his head. I didn't speak up, and girls died because of it. That testimony cracked the case wide. Deputies armed with ground-penetrating radar swept Hayes's land. Beneath one cabin porch, they found disturbed soil. When dug, it revealed bone fragments, teeth, scraps of fabric, a Carroll pit. The count was impossible at first glance. Years of decay tangled into one grim mass. But among the remains, forensic texts matched a dental record. Alice Corwin, missing since 1991. The quarry had given ghosts. Now, the retreat itself gave graves. The arrest of Leonard Hayes was broadcast live. Deputies let him out in handcuffs, his calm smile finally gone. The crowd outside erupted, shouting, weeping, throwing insults and prayers alike. Emily watched from the courthouse steps. Elaine clung to her arm, whispering, "It's over. It has to be over now." But Emily knew better. Nothing was over. Claire and James were still gone, their final moments etched forever on the tape. Madison Boyd lay in a fresh grave, and the forest around Maple Hollow would never again be just trees and shadows. In court weeks later, prosecutors laid out the pattern. The strangers drawn in, the lure of the quarry, the trophies hidden in cabins. Hayes sat impassive, refusing to speak. The jury deliberated less than 3 hours before returning with guilty verdicts on multiple counts of murder and kidnapping. He was sentenced to life without parole. Yet when reporters asked him if he had anything to say, he leaned into the microphone, his voice cold, familiar. "You'll never find them all." The room fell silent. Emily felt her knees weaken because she knew he wasn't lying. That night, she returned to the motel with her mother. They sat by the window, staring at the dark line of trees beyond the parking lot. "Do you think we'll ever really know what happened?" Elaine asked softly. Emily didn't answer at first. She touched the tape recorder on the table, the final artifact of her sister's voice. "We know enough," she said finally. "We know Claire ran. We know James tried to protect her, and we know someone thought they could erase them." Her eyes burned. "But we found the truth. That's what matters now." Elaine nodded, tears glistening. "Truth doesn't bring them back." "No," Emily whispered, "but it keeps them alive." Outside, the woods swayed in the night wind, hiding their secret still. But the silence felt lighter now, less suffocating. The nightmare had been dragged into daylight. Yet Maple Hollow would never forget. 5 years later, Maple Hollow looked the same from the highway. A scattering of houses tucked between pine ridges, the old church steeple rising above the treeing, the quarry, a dark scar hidden deeper in the woods. But for those who lived there, nothing was the same. The retreat closed after Leonard Hayes's conviction. Its cabin sagged in silence, windows broken, porches sinking into weeds. No one dared repurpose the land. It stood as a ghost village, a monument to what had festered in plain sight. Hunters swore they still heard voices in the trees at night. Laughter, screams, whispers riding the wind. Most refused to set foot there. Sheriff Harland retired not long after the trial. The case had consumed him, etched lines deep into his face. When asked why he left, he answered only, "Some truths weigh too heavy." Ranger Mason remained, though quieter. He walked the ridges alone, his eyes scanning the treeing as if expecting to find more graves. He admitted once in a rare interview, "The woods keep secrets, always will. We only uncovered the ones that wanted to be found." Emily Parker rebuilt her life slowly. She left Maple Hollow, moved to Austin, and worked with victims' families through a non-profit. But she never let go of the tapes. She kept them in a small cedar box. Claire's last voice, Claire's last fear. Sometimes late at night, she played them back, not to torment herself, but to remember, to keep her sister present. Elaine lived with her daughter, fragile but steady. On the anniversary each year, they lit a candle for Claire. Sometimes Robert Whitfield joined them, his once hard expression softened by grief. He and Emily had forged a weary peace bound by love for the same ghosts, if nothing else. The state exhumed more remains from Hayes's land in the years that followed. They identified 3 additional victims, but forensic anthropologists estimated there were far more, perhaps a dozen, perhaps more than 20. Hayes never spoke again. He lived out his days in prison, a shadow among shadows, refusing even the press that begged for his story. His final words, "You'll never find them all," lingered like a curse. One autumn evening, Emily returned briefly to Maple Hollow. She parked at the quarry overlook where new fencing and memorial plaques had been installed. Names etched in steel caught the dying light. James Whitfield, Claire Parker Whitfield, Madison Boyd, Alice Corwin, and others. She stood alone, the wind tugging at her hair, and stared into the black water. It no longer terrified her. The quarry was no longer an open wound, but a grave, solemn and silent. She whispered, "We found you, Claire. We found the truth." For a moment, the pine stirred. The wind carried a faint sound, almost like a girl's laughter. High, fleeting, and gone as quickly as it came. Emily closed her eyes. She did not cry. Instead, she smiled softly, believing that somewhere, somehow, her sister had been listening, and in that quiet Maple Hollow's shadows felt just a little lighter.